Good morning, church. Thank you, Senior Pastor Alvin, pastoral team, and all of you for this wonderful privilege that I have to share today on my journey towards acknowledging God as Father and learning about what He has to say about my role as a son, as a husband, and as a father, and how that subsequently resulted in me leaving the public service to join the Center for Fathering and Dads for Life in the full-time capacity to empower fathers to strengthen families. The anchor verses that I would like to share to encapsulate my sharing today will be taken from Ephesians 2, verses 8 to 10 from the NIV translation. For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith. And this not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works so that no one can boast. For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works that God prepared in advance for us to do. Many of you would be familiar with what's said in Galatians and Romans about how we are justified by faith and not simply by the Mosaic commitment to the Mosaic laws. What I particularly like about how Paul emphasizes grace, that is a gift from God in Ephesians 2, and subsequently elaborating upon the good works that God has prepared in advance for us to do in the later chapters of Ephesians from 4 to 6. And this really encapsulates my journey towards restoration as a son, as a husband, and as a father. How I move from death to life, how as a new creation in Christ, I can look forward to the good works that He has prepared in advance for us to do. And this really serves as an encouragement to me because despite all the circumstances that we might be going through, that I had gone through, I know that our God has a purpose for each and every one of our lives. And I know that He is faithful. And let me share my story from this point on to just elaborate on this point. So before I proceed, I'd like to share a bit about myself. So this is a picture of my family. Yes, I'm blessed to have a really wonderful, beautiful, and supportive wife and 3 wonderful children who look to me as their heroes. And for my daughter, I guess I'm going to be her first love in life. This picture is really precious to me because without God's intervention into my life, into my marriage, into my family 5 years ago, this picture will turn out very different today because I will be absent from this family portrait. That was a time in my life when I was struggling so hard with my identity, my self-esteem. I had a wonderful career, a successful career if I could call it, but yet it made me feel very shallow because every time I walked through the door as I come back home, there was a void. I didn't have a relationship with my wife because I just didn't know how to communicate with her. I didn't know how to relate to her on an emotional level. I didn't know how to support her. She had to put up with that unsupportive and just emotionless me for the first 7 years of our marriage. I had a very strained relationship with my parents, especially my father. I held him in contempt for more than 25 years of my life. I denied him access to my children. So my children grew up without really knowing who my father was. And of course, my relationship with my 2 boys, my young boys at that time, was almost non-existent because I just didn't know how to be a father to them. I didn't know what I needed to be doing to engage them. My thoughts of fathering at the time was simply just be a protector of the family, just be a provider. And I did exactly what my dad has done for me. I mean, my dad was good. He provided well for the family. He just wasn't there when I needed him because he traveled and he lived abroad the bulk of my growing up years. So I didn't know how to be a husband. I didn't know how to be a father, and that ate into me. I may be a hero out there at work, in the community, and even in church, but yet when I walked through the doors home, I was a zero. I was nothing at home, and I couldn't reconcile with that. And so, covered with guilt, shame, I got a little depressed, and at that time, I kind of had a bout of rheumatoid arthritis triggered. So physical pains appeared in all my joints, and I was just really miserable, and I wanted out of everything, out of the family, out of work, out of life even. And if somebody were to ask, who is Brian at that point in time, how will you describe him? This picture pretty much sums up who I am. It's a picture of me. One day at work, I had the opportunity to bring my son there. Not so much to make him feel proud about what I do at work, but really to explain to him why Daddy couldn't be at home, why Daddy had to be away most of the time, why. Essentially, I was just telling him that work was more important for him. Since then, I have repented and I have tried to make it up to him. I was a self-made man. I was independent and I like to be seen to be so. I was always striving because nothing less than perfection was acceptable. And I knew that I did all this because I just wanted to garner affirmation. I wanted to know me for what I've accomplished in my life. Truth be told, I was very insecure with who I was, and I was always alone. I could never share, be vulnerable to anyone. I didn't know how to open up. I didn't have father figures, male figures in my life to share my pains and my hurts. So I kind of kept everything bottled up. And despite all the accomplishments and achievements that I've I gotten for myself, I knew that there was always that gap in my heart, that yearning of wanting my father's affirmation. I knew that I wanted to be accepted by him for who I was. I didn't know my father at all. I didn't know his heart. I didn't know who he was as a man. I couldn't really see how he was as a husband because he wasn't around much. I couldn't see how he was as a father. I just couldn't relate to him. I yearned so much to be acknowledged by him as a son, as a man. And because of that, I started to look for affirmation in all the wrong places in life. I started becoming anyone to everyone, and I got pretty good at that. But that left me really hollow. I wanted my dad to tell me what I was good in. I wanted him to tell me where I was headed for in life, what my possible purpose and my destinies could be. We never had such a conversation. So I was lost, and I tried to be good at everything, and that took a toll on me because I got really exhausted trying to be perfect in everything that I do. Failure wasn't an option, and I was just striving and striving. And because of the failed relationship he had with my mom at one point in my adolescent years, home became really tense. There was so much tension that I just couldn't wait to leave home once I hit national service, and I just stayed away from home as long as I could henceforth. And since then, even as I formed a family of my own, I didn't want my family to come in too much contact with my own family, my parents and my brother. And that ate into me also. So I had to guard my heart because I didn't know how to trust people. And I couldn't relate to my wife. And I know that it was hard for her to live with a very insecure man as her husband who didn't know how to love her and to talk to her. And because I couldn't relate to my dad as a father, I never knew how to relate to God as a father. I could never see God as a father. And it hit me with all the guilt and the shame and the depression and the physical pains, culminated to a point where I started to contemplate suicide just to get away from, just to be relieved from all this pain, suffering, and hurt. But at the same time, I made a plea to God that if He is real, and if He still loves me, as the Bible tells me so, I want Him to show me and give me a reason why I should continue living, show me a purpose for my life. And at that point, I just couldn't see anything out. It was bleak. It was around that time when godly men started to appear around me. And that was sometime in 21-5. When I started to come to know a few volunteers from Dads for Life who started to not just surround me and support, but also introduce me to a Father's Prayer group, the Elijah 7000 fathers who would just gather every Saturday morning at 4:56 a.m. to pray for their families, for church, and for our nation. And it all started through a journey that I took with the Halftime Institute, because I was inspired by the book by Halftime by Bob Buford, and how it helped readers discern what our next half of our life could be, moving from success to significance. Through that process of active coaching by one of the Halftime volunteers, I developed a personal mission statement, which was to empower fathers to be better leaders at home, in the community, and in the nation. When I wrote that, I couldn't believe it, because I had no idea how to do any of it. And in fact, those were the same areas that I felt so lacking in. I started researching about fathers' ministry, men's ministry, support for fathers in Singapore at that time, and nothing much came out at that time. And all of my research just kept pointing back to one particular guy called Jason Wong, who founded That's for Life. He founded Yellow Ribbon too, and his name just kept popping up in all these areas of fathering and men. But as I tried to look for his contact, none was to be found. So I went to bed frustrated that night. The very next morning at church, appearing at the pulpit was Mr. Jason Wong sharing about That's for Life. And that got me really, really attentive through the whole session. And at the end of the session, I kind of reached out to him to share my personal mission statement. And that's how I started getting really connected with That's for Life, the people from That's for Life, and the people from the Elijah 7000. And I started to allow myself to receive mentorship, and also to be put into a community of support, praying fathers who are willing to provide a safe space for me to learn about what I need, my role as a father, my role as a husband, and even my role as a son, according to what the Bible says. Every Saturday morning, as the men meet to pray, they will come in as fathers of the world with all the burdens and the concerns. But yet, when we left that prayer session, we will live as sons who have just gone into the embrace of Father God and who have received His shalom for our families. And I've always wondered, I knew in my mind that God was my Father, but I could just never connect it at the heart level. So, this really is the start of my restoration as a son. And the verse that I kept meditating on was Galatians 4, verses 6 to 7. Because you are sons, God sent the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And since you are a son, God has made you also an heir. Since we have received the Spirit of God's Son, our hearts are conscious that God is our Father and we are full heirs. But I could not connect it at my heart until one morning during a prayer session, I just felt the presence of God come on me so strongly that I went on my knees and I just started weeping in front of all the men there. And I think this is really the first time I wept in front of a man in my life. But I couldn't stop. I just went. And then in the stillness of that moment, I heard God say, my son, my son. And I think that changed everything for me. At that point in time, I knew God was real. God is real. God is my Father. And He loves me. And I felt all the hurt, the pain, the guilt, the shame all just leave my body as the tears smeared the floor. And I felt that covering of love and warmth and acceptance as sons and daughters. And I felt God's heart for His sons and daughters. And in that moment, I felt God's heart for my own father. I saw my father through His eyes, and I saw the relationship between my father and his own father, my grandfather, through God's eyes. And that's when I realized why I couldn't receive any love and affirmation from my dad. It's because he never received it from his own father. My dad, I call him Papa, could never give me what he never received. And I felt that swelling of compassion for him. And at that point, I knew I wanted to forgive him. I knew I wanted to reconcile with him. But I just couldn't. There was so much, and I think it was really pride in me that held me back from wanting to do that. It was only a year later when one of the fathers in the prayer groups came forward to me during a prayer session and just knelt down, stood in the gap for my dad and did identification repentance for him. And that broke the last barrier I had towards forgiving my dad. And on that day when I forgave my dad and made a commitment to reconcile with him, I felt the physical pains from all my joints just leave my body. 3 months later, I was medically discharged from rheumatoid arthritis. So today, as you can see in the slide, in the picture, my dad has become a feature for my kids. My kids now know their grandfather. They know who my dad is. And I think it's important for them to see me honoring and loving my dad, because that is the same posture they're going to take towards me. And that is the same posture that they're going to take towards God as Abba Father. Once I got my relationship restored with God and my identity secured as a son, I found that I could now start to work on my relationship with my wife. For the longest time, we felt like we were going divergent ways. I mean, she's in the business field, I'm in the people sector, government sector, and the education sector. I want to empower men, she wants to empower women. And so we've always felt like, the tracks were separate. And I kept being brought back to the verse, Genesis 1, chapters 27 to 28, where so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the ground." God made us to be one for dominion. And we must always turn back to Him first. And when I learned to go back to Him, I learned how to better appropriate His love for my wife. And I knew that I couldn't love my wife out of my own human capacity. I couldn't forgive her for all the perceived offense that she has put forth just on my own. I could never do that on my own. I needed to just go back to the source of love and compassion, and it was through that I come to realize that my wife is the greatest gift that He has given me. My wife is His daughter. And so I started to find renewed capacity to love my wife, to offer her grace, and to also see me through her eyes, and realize how much I've hurt her in the years that we spent together. And that helped me to develop the humility to actually ask for forgiveness, to start to bless her, and to start to work towards seeing our destinies converge. And true enough, the veils of my eyes were removed, and I started to realize that actually our destinies, our individual destinies, actually do converge, because she wants to empower women, I want to empower men. We want to see marriages transform, strengthen. We want to see families strengthen together, starting with the unit of man and wife in marriage. And then the interesting thing is, she knew this all along. I mean, my wife is prophetic. She's seen this coming, but she had so much patience and kindness and grace to let me figure all of this out on my own as I go back to Abba Father to get that revelation for myself. Because now that I'm convicted and I see how our individual destinies do converge, and how we have a mandate as a couple, and how we have a mandate as a family together for our kids, everything just became aligned. So that order with up and the relationship strengthened with God for me and with my wife helps me to next work on my relationship with my children. And I can't be a father to my children just within the confines of my home. I needed to be held accountable for the state of my family. And that's where I appreciate the group of, the community of fathers that continue to lean in to support and to take checks on how I am as a husband, as a father. And through them, I've learned to be vulnerable, to be open about the challenges I have, and to rectify some of the misconceptions I have related to fathering, as I've seen my grandfather and my father, and how I can start making changes and setting a new plumb line for my family, for what the blueprints for a marriage, for sonship, and even for fathering should be in my home for my children. And the verse that we kept going back to as a group of brothers is Malachi 4 verses 5 and 6. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. And we know that the hearts of fathers have to be turned to the children, not just to give them love and affirmation, but also to discern the spiritual gifts that our children have, the spiritual destinies that our children have, and to be good stewards of these destinies and these gifts until time when our children can own it themselves. I know as a father that I have to renounce my ambitions for my children. I have to release them to dream God's dream, and I have to bless them to pursue their God-given destinies. And that is what I needed to start doing for my children. And so, in order to remain secure in my continue to remain secure in my identity as a child of God, and to fulfill my God-given roles, I know that I can't do it alone, and I need a community for support and accountability. So this is just some of my quick takeaways from my journey in my restoration as a son, as a husband, as a father, that I need to protect my personal time with God. To get that first linkage done right, I need to submit myself to godly mentors, not just for myself, but also so my wife has an alternate route. If she can't get to me, she knows who my mentor is, and she can go straight to my mentor to speak into my life or to pray for me when we just can't reconcile our differences in the home. And also to submit myself to accountability groups. And we do this every week. Every week I will have somebody coming in to check on me. How's life? How's your wife? And if I take more than 3 seconds to respond to the latter question, it's going to be a long conversation with whoever asked that question, and I can expect some counseling. And I know that many fathers here today will resonate with what I put up for identity and the roles, and one that we fathers take on. And one of the things that I will kind of want to highlight is every father is a thermostat. We are not the thermometer at home. We don't just gauge the atmosphere. We set the atmosphere in our home. We bring heaven into home, and we create that space, that safe space for our children, for our family. So one thing that I'm mindful of today is I don't just walk into the home unprepared. I make sure that I stop at my favorite coffee shop, get a good cup of tea before I enter home, so that I don't bring in any of my cares and concerns of the world, of work, back into the home, because my family deserves my time. And I try to do this as much as I can. So, I'm going to pivot at this point to share about how all this propelled me into the people sector. Having become a beneficiary of the efforts of the Dads for Life volunteers, having enjoyed my time and received satisfaction volunteering with Dads for Life and the Center for Fathering. One day, Jason Wong, who happens to be on the board of Center for Fathering, invited me to helm Dads for Life Center for Fathering on a full-time basis. At the point in time, I liked what Center for Fathering was doing. I mean, it's the only organization in Singapore that supports fathers. It goes upstream to eradicate fatherlessness in mainstream families. And it also provides effective intervention for fathers in marginalized situations. But yet, that thought about moving from something so secure and public service to the people sector, which is highly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, just scares me. I was concerned about the loss of identity, of esteem. I was concerned about financial security. I was concerned about the drastic lifestyle that my family would have to go through for me to make that transition. So of course, naturally, at that point in time, I declined politely by telling Jason that I would pray about it. Unfortunately, that started a period of 2 weeks where I just couldn't find rest in myself. I kept waking up at night thinking about it. And the verse that I kept going back to was Psalms 103, where I just kept recalling how I have been forgiven of my sins, how I've been healed of my disease, how my life had been redeemed from the pits, how I've been crowned with love and compassion, how all my desires have been fulfilled with good things, how my youth has been renewed like the eagle. And I knew that I was a new creation in Christ Jesus, and there were good works set forth before me that I needed to start getting myself into. And of course, with a few more divine encounters with God in that 2-week period, I went on my knees and I finally just submitted to Him to make the change. And really it was done out of a fear of disobedience. So to cut the long story short, I gave my previous employer 8 months notice to make that transition into the Center for Fathering and Dads for Life. And this next set of slides kind of frames up the landscape that I threw myself into once I joined the people sector. It was a really tough and rough transition for me that spanned almost 3 years. I struggled with a loss of identity. I felt my self-esteem go down because I was so much connected to my previous self in uniform that I didn't know who I was after I stepped out of it. There was so much fear about financial security, and there was guilt about what I have put my family through. But truth be told, on hindsight, I realized that none of those things I worried about actually came to pass, because my family was happy, my family was well provided for. In fact, my family got to see a lot more of me. My wife has a lot more men and the whole community out there watching me as a husband, watching me as a son, watching me as a father, that she didn't need anyone else to keep tabs on me, because everyone is just watching. Yeah. And one of the biggest things I was concerned about was how then do I make a change to all this? If you look at the state of the families today in this landscape, so many things hinder a man from being the best that he could be for his family, for his community, for his society. How do we even go about reconciling or even rectifying some of this? And then once again, God in His graciousness just came through and just opened my eyes to see what He was doing in all of those areas. And I realized that I was blessed with front row seats to see how He was rectifying every single one of these areas that hindered men. He was turning things around and eradicating fatherlessness. All the areas that were affected by fatherlessness in His own ways. And all we had to do as an organization was just to come alongside and to partner Him in what He was really doing, not just in Singapore, but also using Singapore as a launchpad in the other nations around us. So this set of slides just show the 5 nationwide initiatives that we have been privileged to develop and to start. And really it's not of man's doing, because God has already been doing all of this out there in the community. All we had to do was just frame it up, create a platform, reframe it and repackage it so that people could rally around these causes. So like back to school, we encourage dads to encourage the children at the beginning of the school year, to set them right into the academic rigors, and to let them know that, dad is interested and concerned about, what you do in school. We have Pak Tor with Mommy, where on Mother's Day, we encourage dads to just show the children how dads love and honor wives, bringing them out on a date if you can. If not, just demonstrating that, the best gift a dad can give to our children is to love their mother. And then we've also been given a platform to celebrate Father's Day for a month. In fact, we are right now in the middle of the nationwide celebration for Father's Day. It's called Celebrating Fathers, where we rally the whole community, families, moms, children, to affirm and to acknowledge dads for what they've been doing at home, and even on the front lines and in the front lines in this COVID pandemic that we have today. And then we have the quarterly Eat Your Family Day, where we encourage all the corporate leaders to just release their folks so that they can go back and have a family meal together deliberately. And on Children's Day, we get dads to affirm the child for their potential and who they are, and to make them secure in their identity in the home, and such that our children's identity is not defined by grades or how well they do in their ECAs, but for who they are in the family as our children. So all these initiatives, the reach that we have and the engagement of the families that we have, really I say all glory to God, because He has created all of this and we just faithfully do our part in all of this. And also thanks to all our volunteers who engage with us every week, every weekend in the community. This is what they've been doing. They run events to engage the communities. They run programs for those who have expertise in coaching and facilitating skills. They run all these programs for their constituents. And we have father groups. We have more than 70 father groups all around Singapore who will rise up to take on some of this, just to make sure that families are engaged, the unreached are reached, and fathers are equipped to fulfill their roles in the home, in the community, and in society. And all this, like I say again, kudos to all the volunteers and our partners and our donors who made every single one of these possible for us. And really, the impact is really testimony of the tireless efforts of our volunteers, our advocates, our champions into this space. You can see that almost 50,000 fathers have been equipped in Singapore to have a new mindset about what fathering is and not how we receive traditionally from our fathers and our grandfathers, to reframe it such that we are better equipped to provide for our family, to support our wives and our children at the various life cycle needs of our marriage and of our children. We've also had about more than 70 father groups formed all around Singapore, in the schools, in the malls, in the church, in workplaces, and in the community clusters, so that they can better support their own constituents. And we start to see these father groups coming together, church, mosques, and school coming together, just serving the community, providing for the community. And really, we are just a platform to connect fathers, to activate and mobilize fathers to come together, to start living life in community for our families, for the rest of the fathers who might be struggling in their roles out there in the community. And we've also seen a keen interest from 26 other nations who have approached us to help equip them on some of the programs in Center for Fathering, and also to start driving the movement, National Fathers Movement, to activate and to mobilize fathers in their own land, to take a stand, to reclaim the headship role, and to have a voice in all the spaces in the land. And so this really is my last slide and my pitch to all of you, Bartley Christian Church, that it really takes a community to raise our children together. And these are all the partners that we have in the Christian space that we work with to make sure that Christian fathers have the right support, the resource, and the community to come together to live life in community, and not just support fathers in our own church, within the church, but also out there in the community and beyond the shores of Singapore. And I believe truly that we will see a greater social impact when your passions and your expertise combine with the platforms that we have. And one of the things that we will request from you is always prayers, your efforts in advocacy for this active fathering cause, your resource, and your time as our volunteers. And I want to thank all of you once again for this opportunity for me to share my journey towards acknowledging God as Father, and also receiving from Him a clearer understanding of my role now as a son, as a husband, and as a father. And I want to encourage all of you that, in this journey of fathering, we are not alone, and there is a huge network out there that's just willing to come alongside, as they have come alongside, to help me turn around my marriage, to give me a new lease of life, and to also reclaim the lost relationships that I had with my children and my own father. And now I am convicted that it is possible, because we don't do this out of our own efforts, because all we need to do is just look and see what God is already doing in our community, in our church, in our nation, and even in the nations around us. And all we have to do simply is just to come alongside and to partner Him in all of this. So if you'd like to know more about what we do at the Center for Fathering, Dads for Life, and how you can support us, the QR code is on the set of slides here. Just snap it, get to know us. And I thank you for this session today that I have with all of you. So have a wonderful weekend, and God bless all of you. Thank you.